This is actually a great segue into this post that I did the other day, and I want to expand upon some of these ideas. You've heard me refer to this parallel economy many of times. We've done several segments on that, but I want to let's expand upon some of these ideas and where it is that I'm coming from. We'll read some of the posts, and what I'll do is, because Twitter only allows limited characters, I will reiterate certain things and expand upon it. So right here, post: the need for a parallel economy is well beyond mere disagreements. No rational person actually expects to be agreed with on every given subject, and this includes politics. What we have here are severe ideological differences and hatred. Now, what I mean by that is that some folks think that, and really it's a gaslight more than anything, that this is about disagreements. The need for a parallel economy is about, oh, well, this company said something that you disagree with. That's not what this is about regarding mere disagreements. I think it's an anticipation and an expectation that somewhere, someone's going to disagree with you on something. It's not even worth mentioning. It's not even worth prefacing your argument to say, well, I don't agree with everything it is. You say that it's a non-point because that's an expectation. The difference is between what those gaslighters say versus what's actually taking place is that what we have is actual ideological differences and hatred. So what happens is the company gets funded by the customer or consumer or whatever you want to call them. And then they use that power platform and use the company itself, not just individuals or mere individual people like that work for the company. We're talking about through the company, they will espouse ideological differences and how much they actually despise you. And not often, well, I won't say not often, often it is, but not always is it just them like making a claim. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes it's about like inaction. You see, for example, Gina Carano situation where you had Pedro Pascal literally is the guy in the same damn show with Lucasfilm equated to the entire half of the voting population as Nazis. Okay. And nothing happened to him because of that. Apparently, Gina Carano makes a comparison to the same era, says something far more mild, and basically that people turn on each other. The state turns people on each other, and this is how you get to that kind of drastic point. She got let loose. So that's an example of that. Continuing on. In the mainstream entertainment sector, there exists a lack of balance. They made it clear that they'll use the brands they own to not only display their political preferences, but also shun the political opponents that accepted political position is authoritarian leftism. So what I mean by that is that that's the acceptable position. Generally, if you say something that is authorized or, let's say, advocated by the general authoritarian left position, you are going to be fine. If you work for these companies, you're not going to be fired because of that. For the most part, with very few exceptions, you're going to be fine. And I think it's less, and you've heard me make this point before, less about, well, the politics are in the entertainment sectors where they should not be. And though that may be part of it, right? It makes certain sense that why would this certain company be even taking a political position in this regard? But it's not just about that. What we have here is a lack of balance in that it's heavy-sided in one direction. People would have less of an issue, or that would be what it is that I'm advocating. We'll get into that here in a little bit. But people would have more issue, or less issue, if it was more balanced. So for an example, let's take Marvel Comics. Marvel Comics has no problem using their platform to advocate, in this day and age, some sort of authoritarian leftism and social justice. Marvel Studios comes out with the whole aspect of what's going on out there in Florida with the parental rights bill. You have that every month, if it's in the name of social justice, be it in Pride or Blackity Black, whatever, they'll authorize and co-sign that. Of course, they'll use their characters to do so. They'll have narratives that look at whatever the social justice left is advocating, and they'll depict that in a more positive light. Right here, Marvel, y'all remember they had they've done some goofy things that have been very on the nose with their politics. You can see that they skipped 4 years of painting a president in a positive light. You remember Obama was on the cover of an Amazing Spider-Man book. Trump didn't get such a deal. In fact, he ended up being a villain, depicted as a villain in one of their comics. So what they do is they'll paint a different side ideologically as the enemy, but they won't paint them in a positive light. Now, if they did, you'd have less people having less issues, right? But right now you have it being heavy-sided one way, okay? Continuing going. I said they aren't neutral. I say they take the money that their adversaries give them because they control what they love, and then tell them to go how much they suck. Never depicted their ideological enemies in a good light. I personally don't expect them to change. I'd rather compete with them. Again, what I'm saying is they now control a lot of big mega corporate entities, control brands that didn't start off the way that they are now, but they are the way that they are now. And they really bank on and depend on the money and resources and that's like, I don't know, enthusiasm. They depend on that from the people that are their ideological enemies. If they didn't have that, then we wouldn't even really be having this conversation, to be completely honest. I don't expect Marvel or DC to change. I've said this many, many, many times. I don't expect them to change. I'd rather just fucking compete with them. I say some people have far more nonchalant attitude about this, thinking, who cares? I just want to consume. And this is why they get their asses kicked culturally. Others are doomers and think this has to be. Both of these types of losers should be mocked, shamed, and then ignored. The first person I'm mentioning is that person who will justify their addiction to a lot of these brands. And they do it so much so that they'll try to point out, let's say, a route that you may go in which maybe you maybe consume some form of entertainment that isn't clean. Let's say that. But that's a red herring at best, but more so it's a deflective tactic in which you don't want to acknowledge your addiction, or rather you justify it. But it's actually worse. You justify it by saying, well, you look at what it is that you do. Okay. Whereas that problem is still a problem. And when I talk about culturally getting your ass kicked, I'm saying that's just what it is. The authoritarian left controls subcultures. It's just the reality of the authoritarian social justice left. That's what it is. Now, go back to previous videos. Not going to bore you to death with details, but you've heard me say many times that this is not just a matter of the left who controls these brands pushing you out. A lot of it has been neglect and your nonchalant attitude. So you say, well, I just want to consume. Who cares? New Spider-Man movies out. I start glistening, nostalgia bait. Oh, I don't care. I just want to consume. Who cares about their politics, whatever, about the people that created it? Who cares? It's not as woke as some of the other films, which unfortunately is now culturally things have been dumbed down to where now just because something isn't woke, it means that it's great, right? But what I mean by that is that your adversaries don't offer you such reciprocity. So they don't look at that and say, well, we'll do the same, right? They don't go consume or be customers of knowingly, like, let's say a libertarian, right? Or conservative or whatever non-leftist that you like to point to. They don't ever do that. This is why I continue to say that you fund them, they don't fund you. And your nonchalant attitude and often neglect has got us certainly into that point. But you go watch my previous videos in which I've talked about that many times. I say entertainment is the easiest to replace. So I think this is where such a parallel economy happens first. Then hopefully it catches on in other industries that people rely on. I also welcome this as a form of decentralization while also eliminating the status quo. And I'm going to continue this next one, and then I'll summarize that point. I say this is decentralization in both economy and politics, which I welcome and prefer. If the result is a bunch of entities that are politically active, left, right, or whatever, and neutral ones that don't care, this is good for transparency's sake and competitive markets. So what these two posts, this is arguably the most important part of this. I do believe that when we talk about this economy that is going to exist, that has some things that people enjoy, like, want, and need, and is detached from what you see as the mainstream right now, I think entertainment is going to be the first look or glance into that. Okay? Because it's the easiest to replace. It's not food. It's not water. It's not housing. It's not internet. It's not these things that people have become to rely upon so much. These are things that you generally have to go out of your way to reach into your pocket, pay for, speak with, in terms of its enthusiasm and all of that. And that attention and enthusiasm, and of course, from a monetary standpoint, that could be rerouted to something else. And it's the easiest thing to do because, again, often a lot of this stuff isn't seen as a necessity. So what I hope is, and what I envision is that if that stuff starts to catch on, where you have a version of whatever is in this parallel economy, and it's being very, very competitive, you'll see that not only inspire, but it'll start to go into other industries that people are more dependent on. And that is certainly what I welcome. Now, the second part I talk about is that the decentralization effort and what this will be. And what I mean by that is that decentralization is a beautiful thing. See, what we have now, and I mean it both politically and economic wise, what you have right now is a bunch of mega corporate entities that own a bunch of properties, like an ass load of properties that are seen as legitimate. Okay. Where as to, I think with this parallel economy and more of those start to see certain success, what you'll see is a bunch of little entities that see success, and they all won't be controlled by, let's say, one person or one big group, block of people. So as folks start to reroute their attention and money from, let's say, Disney, for example, and then go into the new Disney, and I'm not saying like a company that does exactly what Disney does, but just is ideologically different. No. I'm saying like the next big thing, right? Because Disney didn't start as Disney as it is right now. So what would happen is that people would reroute their attention to that, and those things would then be perceived legitimate as, or from that audience of customers or whatever it is. And that means that this wealth, if you will be more, it's economized, it's marketized, where it's you have a lot of entities that are seeing success, and there's not these big conglomerates, or rather these big entities that own so much. So it's decentralization, and from what it is that we have more so right now. Politically, what I mean is there are going to be those that are open, which is, again, I'm not against that. I am not against a company saying that. When I say not against it, I'm saying that obviously, even if I disagree with where it is they're coming from, whatever, I'd rather them be transparent about where is my dollar going, right? Is my dollar going to some idiot who is then turning around and using that money to attempt to suppress liberty, right? Is that what this is, right? So at that point, we're antithetical, okay? If that's the case, I would rather them be open and honest with where it is that they are at. So then I could reroute my funds and my attention to someone that is more aligned with me, or at minimum neutral, to where they just don't give a shit. They just don't care. They don't take positions politically. So I welcome either the neutrality or the folks that are just as blunt and out there. What it does is create more transparency, certainly in the market. And again, going back to the decentralization effort. So people are then supporting things that are more aligned with them because they're looking at the end game. I welcome that. I certainly welcome that. Okay. I say this is not unrealistic. We need the next Marvel, DC, and the next Star Wars. I'm not saying culturally aligned versions of them. I'm saying entities that catch on with customers and then remain competitive through the next decades. This is a very doable thing. I get it all the time with music or the comic book stuff that we are creating. You get these people who just act as if, And I think it's because they want to protect the status quo and they don't like how the world looks because they don't know how it's going to look. Any event that, let's say that these companies that you loved or these brands are no longer seen with that legitimacy, their bacon is threatened by that. So you get these people who are black pillars, if you will, and they're like, well, you can't do this. You'll never be able to do that. This is unrealistic. You're delusional, whatever it is. And to that, I say, that's energy that I don't necessarily want around me per se. But those people, as I mentioned earlier, should be certainly ignored. And the difference between this age and the previous age is that now people are more so able to own that said creation and make that lucrative. The reason why all of these entities are now controlled by just, one big company versus the other. The reason that is the case is because often creatives had to go the route of, and that became the industry standard of, I have to do this in order to make it lucrative for me. So whether it be working for it, the company, or selling off the assets to a company, whatever that looks like, that is what had to happen in order for that to get to the customer. Now we don't have to worry about that as much. You can get a direct line of sight. The internet has opened that up, a direct line of sight with your audience. So now I could say, well, I could skip these lines here or whatever thing that becomes the industry standard, and I could just answer directly to my customers. So because of that, as more companies and entities grow, you're going to see a lot more of them retain that sort of ownership because technologically they have an advantage that they simply did not have back in the day. I conclude. So many major entities have made their politics known and they don't plan on stopping, except that they've initiated this conflict and act accordingly. Those of us that value liberty should begin looking into ways to deprive them of funding as both competitors and customers, right? Do what it is that you can is what it is that I'm saying. If this idea catches on, there will be many failures and some successes, which is important to note. Not everybody's going to be great. Just simply being a alternative is not good enough. But the result will be an entire economy that is largely disconnected from the greasy hands of the authoritarian social justice left. And we're going to win. That's important. Yes, there are other things that need to be acknowledged and addressed, be it in tax advantages, not necessarily tax advantages. It's more of regulatory bodies giving advantage to some of these companies. If they get lined up with taxpayer dollars, you want that type of stuff eliminated. I believe this sort of, when you look at decentralized money and how that's come along, Bitcoin stuff, it's allowing people to disconnect from even the banking shit to a certain degree. And those need innovation as well. Remember, as I said earlier, those are going to be some of the entities that I think it goes into after the entertainment aspect has been addressed. Either way, I do not believe for once, and this is what I would say to these loser ass black pillars who act like, ESG scores and all these other things that they mentioned, to act like basically there's nothing it is that we can do. So they're demoralized. That's bullshit. You cannot look at what exists right now and act as if even the customers have done everything it is that they can to basically defund these major entities. That's horseshit. That is simply not true. Again, you can see the latest movies and stuff that these guys drop and how folks just will temporarily forget everything these companies said that they stand for, everything these companies did, and everything that they said they were going to do. So until that addiction is addressed and altered more so, I don't want to hear shit about ESG or this black pill bullshit where you act as if everything that can be done has been done. They're just still going to get what it is that they want. That's bullshit. Because you haven't done everything it is that you can. You haven't. We have not seen in mass that be the case. So once folks, because really that's all they rely on, right? It's perceived legitimacy is what it is. Where people look at what the things it is that they control and they say, well, this is what I like. So I have to go to them for it. It's perceived legitimacy. When people take that perception and they say, you know what? Okay, I'm going to look at that company in the same light, in the similar light as I look at this alternative company. Then let's come back to the table and have a discussion about what the hell is going on. But we can't have that conversation yet because not all aspects have been addressed. And certainly we have not exhausted all opportunities and tactics. We have not done that. Until we do that, shut the fuck up about these things that you can't control or the things that are more difficult to address, right? This is, in this little sector, you have as much power. You have more power than you understand. You have more power than you understand as a customer. Treat yourself with dignity, treat yourself with respect, and understand that these companies depend on you, regardless of how much money they may get laced up on the side, be it by the government. Or these companies depend on you. How can you deprive them of that more often? And this is where the companies that are the alternatives come in and try to do something about it and give people something it is that they want and desire. When we exhaust those options, I believe that we're going to be having a completely different conversation. And they're utterly terrified. The authoritarian left is utterly terrified that this would ever catch on, which is why I think they have folks that want to protect the status quo so much, because in the event this changes, their power is gone. Even them having positioning themselves to get future generations is eliminated once people have that mindset. So act accordingly, bros. We're going to get there. We're going to get there, but it's going to require action. It's going to require work. It's not going to happen overnight. But most importantly, respect yourself as a damn customer and understand how much power it is that you actually have. You just listened to a clip from my podcast, For Canon's Sake, which is live throughout the week at 12 p.m. Central on youtube.com/YoungRipper59 and odyssey.com/@YoungRipper59. Be sure to check out my website, ericdjuly.com, so you can stay up to date with everything it is that I'm doing. You can also become a member and get access to a bunch of cool perks and exclusive content, which includes a social media hub where you can interact with myself and other members. It even has an app that you can get, which is now live in the Google and Apple stores.